Hey, everybody, welcome back to Little Things Are Big Things Education Podcast with T Free and K Dub. Excited to have you back for this week, which is focused around perfectionism is the ultimate in procrastinating. We're going to talk about the idea that if you don't even start, how can you perfect? Like the definition of perfecting is actually making something better. So you have to start first. And then we're going to talk about some of the ways that this has shown up in our lives where we can shut down, and talking about keeping the barriers to entry very low so we can get started and not shut down immediately. And then K-Dub's going to finish this out with kind of a story about his approach through some of our online learning this year and how he switched his mindset to really set himself up to not get frozen by perfectionism and understanding that this isn't going to be perfect. And not only does my mindset need to be that way, but my students' mindset, and we got to remind them of that. So excited to have you on board with us. Let's get started.
All right, folks, he's coming to you live from Bowling Green, Kentucky, where he is operating on a little bit less sleep because he just built a fabulous closet for himself and his wife in his new house, but still bringing all that energy. He's got the 3 years of Challenge Day in addition to many years of teaching and tutoring. My great friend and an awesome teacher, T Free.
And K-Dub's coming to you live from the PNW. He's got some great news. Hopefully we can tell you more about in the coming weeks. We won't jinx it right now. So we're both kind of flying on high / adrenaline. Maybe that's what I'm running on right now. So excited to have you all here. And my best bud, K-Dub, with his 11 years of teaching and 20 years of coaching.
Yeah, speaking of adrenaline, we would love for you to go ahead and give us those likes and those subscriptions on Little Things Are Big Things Education. That'll give us another kick of adrenaline and probably a little bit of dopamine as well. Give us the 5 stars while you're there. We've earned it. It's not great inflation when you're doing a great job. We won't call it perfect yet, Tim, but we're getting there. So as we get started today, our big idea is perfectionism is the ultimate in procrastination. Where do you want to start?
I want to start with that comment you made because we won't call it perfect yet, but we're getting there. I think that's a great conversation starter for this whole thing because, one, you got to start somewhere to become perfect, right? If you and I in November or whenever it was that we decided this was going to be a fun project, we're like, you know what? We're going to wait till we're really good at this to get started. I don't know if we'd even have an episode, let alone episode 32 today. That's right. This is episode 32 since January. So yes, get it out there, get going, take a crack at it, and don't let perfectionism freeze you and keep you from actually achieving and attempting. So I think that's a great spot to start is you have to try, you have to start in order to perfect. And then I think the other piece on that is this idea that, to me at least, perfectionism or being perfect is just this false illusion, is not a reality anyways. It's this destination that we're going towards that does not really exist. But
yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that you and I talked about is like one of those things that creates a barrier to entry is a term that you and I talk about a lot as well with relation to perfectionism becoming procrastination, is people who have an unrealistic idea of what it's going to mean like at the beginning, and or what it's going to look like at the beginning, right? Like that kid that tries out for drama and tries out for the lead role, their first attempt at being in drama, and they never do it again, or they never do the work because they didn't get the lead role, right? Where they didn't, you come out to football and you're not already an expert level player. And I think, to me, that's the thing that I see as, like, we continue to talk about kids these days. That is one thing that I'm seeing more of in kids these days, is that sense of like feeling like they have to be an expert before they can even get started.
Right. And I'm interested, and I haven't done any research on this, but I'm interested to see how that might be related to the idea of social media always shows our best selves. And so we're used to seeing picture perfect all the time. So unless I can put picture perfect out, I'm not going to show up because I don't want to make a fool of myself. Yeah. And I do, granted, I spend a lot of time in like the self-help and personal development world and realm, but like I do see more people now posting raw, vulnerable stuff. It's like, no, like this was me, messy hair, no makeup on after 45 hours of like, taking care of the family. And then I still tried to show up and do my dream in the morning, and it's like, yes, you go get it, but more often than not, 95% of the posts we see are the perfect filter from the perfect angle. And it took 120 shots to get this one. And now I've got 100 likes in the first hour. So I guess I'll leave it up instead of deleting it and trying again. Everything is amplified to this new level of that's normal. It's like, no, that's not normal. That's a goal and you can get there, but you got to work to it.
Well, yeah, and I think the thing I love about that analogy is the part that you spoke to about like the 120 attempts and like finding the perfect filter. What they ultimately created was perfect, but they didn't show you the work that went into creating that or near perfect tweet or whatever, Instagram post, right, or whatever the thing is that we're talking about. I do also really like the idea that you brought up this like fear of entry, because all we're seeing in social media is perfectionism, because I think you're right. And I think enough people are talking about that now that there seems to be some movement, some momentum towards really like pushing back against that idea. And just one fun example that you reminded me of, we have this really great teacher, shout out to Sarah Lemire if you're out there and listening, who, when she is talking to her students about using their cameras on Zoom class, because, there's a lot of kids that don't want to do that, and there's perfectly good reasons not to, but like her image that she uses in her work around trying to get kids to do that is like her hair, bedheaded, in a robe, like still holding a half-made cup of coffee, or like, it's like the total, like, this is not how we all want to present ourselves, but it just creates that sense of like, here's me not being perfect, so that you don't feel like you have to be perfect. It's a really good example of how that can be helpful for kids. So
love that. And kind of jumping back just a little bit, because I loved that you spoke again to this idea of nobody shows the work. I love when I hear people talk about like, oh, I'm like, they're calling me the overnight success, but they didn't show you the 8 years of all-nighters I put in to now be considered an overnight success because I popped up out of nowhere. It's like, no, I put in the grind for years and years and years, and then I finally got that one episode, right? Like, we're waiting for ours to get us to pop, right? Or I finally got the right video that had the right laugh that then went viral. Or I talked to the right person at that one networking meeting that I had the courage to go up and talk to, that then, connected me with somebody else. Or I took that extra class, or I asked that person out, or, like all the things in our lives that if we hadn't taken that chance and hadn't put in the work, we wouldn't be who we are and where we are today. But a lot of times we just look at, this is where I got to be. This is what is considered perfect in whatever my life expectations have gotten me to again, right? And this idea of the expectations guiding us to how it's supposed to be, and not putting in the work, right? Like, I'm going to quote Miley Cyrus because I think it's hilarious. It's about the climb, it's about the climb.
It's about the climb. It's about the climb. And to quickly tag my own school here, our new tagline at IDB Wells Barnett High School is lifting as we climb, which is directly connected to some work around women of color and associations and things like that, which is a really cool idea. But as we circle around, we've talked about barriers to like not getting started, because I'm worried that I won't be able to get to the perfect thing fast enough, or that I won't ever be able to get to the perfect thing. I'm wondering for you, because for what I also see with my students in particular, with projects, is they get this idea of, a couple weeks ago I talked about like having different ways to express the learning. So movie trailer, comic strip, whatever. What I find, and you directly asked me about this question, but like the kids who like, they get started and they're like, oh, this isn't going to turn out the way I wanted it to, and they just stop. Right. And we talked a little bit about how I try and combat that, but I'm wondering for you, how much you see of that as well, and or if you have a feeling of which one, the not getting started or the not finishing, you see more of.
I usually see the not getting started, and but again, I think it's because of two things. I think for my higher achieving students, they want to see an example. And so they have something to follow, right? They're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay, I can do that, right? Versus the just go for it, like what's in your brain, dump it out, see what happens. Like you're going to find some stuff you like. You're going to find some stuff you don't like. You don't even have to put that crap back in your brain. Just keep the stuff you do like, like do some brain dumping on a paper for a little bit and see what happens. But that one, I think, holds some students back. But then again, separate from this procrastination idea, I think there's also the idea that I have a lot of kids that don't start because they don't want to look stupid. And that's a whole different issue, right? So I definitely, when you put all of it together, it's the not starting. And so trying to always make that barrier to entry very low. Come on in. Like when I'm calling people, or whether it's popsicle sticks or the random number generator or whatever, trying to get people on the board or at least popcorning ideas, it's like, hey, how would I start this problem? I don't know. Oh, okay, well, if you did know, what would you do first? And I mean, and they still stay on that for as long as they can without realizing that I'm not going to leave them. And so finally they throw out something. And if that something is anywhere remotely close to somewhat recoverable, I say, yes, great start, and like reward that barrier to entry and then get them started and then try to rally somebody else to help pull us closer to the path. But I think the finishing part is interesting because there's like again, if they don't have an example and they don't know what is considered finished, right? Because like, I don't know, maybe it's in math because we do have like X equals an answer, right? Like it feels like there's an ending point. But like, for example, the project we've been doing the last couple of weeks, like it took 4 or 5 steps to get to the final answer. And by the time we've done those 4 or 5 steps, even though it says, this number with these units, which is exactly what the question asked, they're like, wait, is that the answer? And so they don't know where the finishing point is. And I think that is the difficulty for my kids on the finish side, is they don't know when they're done.
That's interesting.
Maybe it's perfectionism, right? Because they're like, wait, could I do something else to perfect this, especially on a project? But it's just, I don't know when I'm done.
Well, you bring up an interesting concept though, right? Because I think my definition of perfectionism would include, probably not without a prompt, but now that you're talking about it, would include something about there is no finish line, right? If you are perfect, you're continuing to evolve. I'll use a really good sports example. Anyone who follows college football knows that Nick Saban is, without any reasonable question, the most successful college football coach of all time. And the primary reason for that is that he has refused to stay the same, right? Like he wants to be the best more than he wants to be right. And so he'll like, okay, look, the game is being officiated in this way. The game has changed in this way. I'm not going to win a championship 7-0. I'm going to win it 42-21 and change the way that we play football so that we can still win the championship. And so that idea of like a finish line is something I hadn't really thought about until you mentioned it just now. But that is a really important concept in actually being perfect, is understanding that you're never actually going to get there, right? Because that line is going to continue to move, because the better you get at something, the more you're going to realize that there's room for improvement.
Right. And the whole idea of a growth mindset, the whole idea of perfectionism, the whole idea of like, if I accomplish my goal and it feels good for a moment, how long does it feel good for? Not for forever. Eventually we're going to want more. Like we can't just keep sitting there. Or, as Boehner used to tell us, you either get better or you get worse. You never stay the same. And they used to like confuse me at first. Shout out to Baldwin High School. It used to confuse me because I'm like, wait a second. I didn't do anything today. Why did I get worse? And then that idea of if somebody else is working in a relative format, if I stayed the same, but they got better in a relative format, I'm now worse. I was like, oh my gosh, it's mind blowing. Right. And like, I took that into finance and business and the whole like idea of compound interest. And like, if you got money sitting underneath the mattress, you're actually losing money versus if you've got it working in the, wherever you've got, hopefully creating positive returns on investment. But yeah, it's interesting. The idea of when do I stop? And the answer should be never. Yeah. But when do I turn in my project is a different question.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And thank you for kind of circling back to the school part of it, because you brought up something else that's really important. You talked about scaffolds. And I think one of the things that I have gotten much better at when I first started teaching, I eventually got into a mode, probably second year, where working with the librarian that we had that was really great at Canyon Park, and a couple other teachers, shout out to Mr. Tupper and Mr. White at Canyon Park. Really, and I shouldn't, I'm forgetting his name now, so I feel bad. But we had some great teachers there that I got to work with. Casey Kellogg, that's who I was thinking of. But we really wanted to do research, right? We got to the idea that we wanted to perfect teaching research and get our kids to be perfect as they could be, right? Like perfect middle school researchers. And the first mistake that I know I made, and I don't remember where everybody was at in the process, but the first mistake that I made was from day one, asking the kids, we identified 6 steps to doing a research project or to doing research. I was asking kids to do all 6 steps every single time we practiced. And so I got better at, okay, scaffolding. Hey, this time I'm going to give you the questions and I'm going to give you the sources. I just want you to take the notes. And then another time saying, okay, you guys are going to find the sources, but I'm still going to give you the questions, and changing up from task to task what I was doing for them and what I was modeling for them, and then what they were doing on their own, and then giving them that feedback. And so then at the end of the semester, right, it's like now after multiple attempts, we're finally going to try and do the whole thing by ourselves. And we have all this other information to fall back on as practice to do the best that we can. And so I think chunking is a really important step in helping kids who want to get to the perfectionism, but need some help getting started. Or you can reduce one of those barriers by also just chunking out the steps.
I love that, and I'm stealing that for next week, because we're going from our volume project that we've been doing for the last 3 weeks into the statistics one. And like there was a part of me, especially about week 2, where I was like getting frustrated that I was still having to guide and handhold so much. And I'm like, why are they not getting this? Why are they not like able to, work through some of these problems on their own? And like listening to you talk about like, oh, because I said, here's a massive problem that's going to take you a day or 2 to complete, like an hour and a half of class time, like solve it. And like, I was like, why didn't you answer all 16 parts and components with business mixed in with volume, mixed in with algebra? Like, come on. Oh yeah. Because we didn't practice that at all year, because our curriculum is much more heavy focused on here's a problem, solve for X, maybe plug it in, move to the next one. Here's the same type of problem, solve for X, move to the next one. Here's a problem, solve for X. Yeah. And like giving my students something that's like, here's the cost of, this material. Here's how much that material weighs. Here's the size of the material. How much does the object cost? And they're like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, first, go find the surface area. And they're like, how do I do that? I'm like, okay, pull out your formula sheets. We made it too complicated. You forgot the easy stuff. Like, oh yeah. I remember how to do this. Okay. Then what do I do? Well, find volume. How do I find volume? Multiply by the thing. It's like, okay, cool. And then, you work through the 5 or 6 steps and then let them try to repeat that later. So yeah, I was super frustrated with it, but I've given myself some grace. Week 3 this week, we're kind of wrapping everything up, is going much better. And then next week I'm pumped, because I think they're going to have more flexibility of what the final looks like, right?
Mhm.
They're going to build their own game of chance. It's not trying to figure out how much a stop sign costs. It's like, no, legit go play a game and see if your friends will play it. Or did you make it so unfair nobody wants to play your game? Or did you make it so rewarding you're going to lose all your money? Like, I'm stoked for this project to see how it plays out. But
you are reminding me of a teacher on the show The Wire who was trying to get to his students and taught them the odds on dice in order to get them to even begin wanting to learn math.
Yep.
That was the thing that you were just reminding me of. If you don't mind, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how, like, the idea of perfectionism, it's not just an enemy of procrastination, but it's also like has created kind of this way of doing things that I think honestly none of us like. But before I do that, I wanted to make sure that I didn't cut you off in the middle of the greatness of how your project's going in class.
Oh, you're good. I was on a rant because I got excited. You know how that is. So no,
I know, I do. I didn't want to interrupt though.
Just excited for what is possible when we take on a new project after they've attempted it. So working towards our perfect project, so to speak.
Awesome. So when we came up with this idea for procrastination and perfectionism, one of the other things that I was reminded of, we're doing some equity work at our school with Joe Truss, who's working with us and is doing a really great job. And it's actually been about a month or so now, trainings ago, or PDs, whatever you want to call it. He just gave us this bullet pointed list of the 11 components of white supremacy culture. And I'm going to just take a pause for a second. So I'm going to explain why why perfectionism is considered part of white supremacy culture. And before people's hackles get up at being talked down to or whatever, I just want to make a quick caveat. When you hear me read through these bullet points, you're going to probably identify with having been put in these situations and not liking it. So you might not like the label, but I think we can all agree that, like, living in a society or working in an organization where these things are the norm sucks. So we'll just start there, and then you had something that was similar that we were talking about that I think it'll be good for us to riff off of. So I'm going to kind of bird point. I want to make sure I'm showing my work here. So showingupforracialjustice.org is where I'm getting these bullet points from. But perfectionism is explained as having little appreciation for people who are doing the work, right? So we just talked about, like, not showing our work, right? And how that's not something that we focus on, and how that kind of messes with people getting started. It's more common to point out how either a person is inadequate or is failing at the task, rather than, like, pointing out where they're being successful. Like, we all know how much that can be frustrating when you've put a ton of work into something and then someone, just like a teacher, only points out the things on the paper or in the math problem that you did wrong and doesn't acknowledge, oh, I really liked your opening line here, or this is really great imagery, or this is a really good quote that you used.
Right, just the red pen scratch outs.
Yeah, just the red pen scratch outs. I could go on a whole rant about red pens and some things I've been told about that, but we'll hold off on that. So this is the one that I think I identify with the most, both because it's something that I struggle with on a personal level, and it's something that I know I've played on teams where this was something that took place. You know, I talked about this person before without naming names. Mistakes are seen as personal, not as, like, okay, right? Like, in other words, like, the person making the mistake is now a mistake versus being someone who made a mistake. And so, you know, kind of the idea of doing wrong versus being wrong kind of concept. And then just the idea that there's very little time or energy put into reflecting on what we can learn from the mistakes that we made to improve what we're doing, right? So that kind of goes back to being flexible and modeling the way and being reflective, all things that we've talked a lot about on this podcast. So I just wanted to point out to that because it's a really good example of how, like, you can use a term, white supremacy culture, which might be immediately off-putting to some people who are listening to this, and certainly to a significant part of the population. But when you really drill down on what we're talking about, I don't know anybody who wants to work, play, or live in a place where that's how people are treated. Do you think I'm wrong on that?
No, I mean, I agree with you in lots of spots there, right? One, as soon as you throw out white supremacy culture, someone's going to hear white supremacy and be like, oh, and they're going to red flag and triggers are flying, and they're going to probably stop listening. And for a handful of reasons, and everybody's got their own reason. And then there's the other side of it of if you listen to the things behind it, which is, the fairly standard way that I know at least I grew up and experienced, and we had the same upbringing to for the most part.
Yeah,
where it's like, oh yeah, that was a 90% white school, and this was what we did all the time, and that's what was expected. And yeah, I remember saying, oh my gosh, I'm such a screw up, versus, oh, I made a mistake, or I screwed up. It's I am a screw up. And it was very personal, and it doesn't feel good.
No, I mean, it doesn't. And so I think what can be a barrier then, or can allow for students to have the idea of perfectionism in their mind, then stopping them from getting started or finishing, is feeling like you talked about being embarrassed to make a mistake in front of people, right? It's that idea of, well, if I make that mistake, I'm now going to be identified either as a mistake or by the mistake that I made, right? Even if you're not calling me a mistake, people are going to point to that in some way, shape, or form, and it's going to somehow become part of my identity. And so it's safer to make no attempt, right? And that's something that I think, because of social media, just in its basic level of everybody's out there, right? Like, we're all in some way being noticed. We're all putting ourselves out there. Some of us more intentionally and whatever than others, but that makes all of that stuff more public and therefore scarier. And so then it's much safer to just kind of not.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, so many of those things, and that was the first time I've heard that list. So I'm trying to go back and remember some of it that you were speaking to. But I mean, obviously the two that you kind of spoke to me land just, because of the research we know around engaging questions and how that actually makes things stick and putting meaning to all of that. So the other one, right, is that idea of the red penning that I kind of made a comment on. I would much rather either turn in a piece of paper that I copied off my neighbor that I know is correct, or not turn in a paper, period, because I'm not going to get red marks. And having a missing assignment in the grade book is easier for me to explain to my parents, I forgot about it, or I was sick that day, or I got called out of the class, or whatever excuse it is to not attempt it, is easier than, oh yeah, I got a 10 out of 40, and that's because I'm no good at math, and I hate math, and I'm no good at school, and I should just quit, right? Again, making it very personal. And I think this is where you were talking too, is the spin I had on this. For anybody who's read the book, The 4 Agreements, one of the agreements in there was, don't take things so personal. Don't take life personal. And this is such a good universal tool, but so important for perfectionism is and again, for me, my experience around perfectionism, when I become a perfectionist to an unhealthy level, what I notice I do is my whole worth is wrapped up in being successful, or being the one someone can count on, or doing it right, or scoring the final point, whatever athletics I'm doing, right? When I get into my perfection mode, I know that whatever I committed to, I have to do it. And if I don't, it's not because I made a mistake. It's because I am no good. And I'll get into an unhealthy mental state, and I'll just rip myself apart. And it's super unhealthy. It's terrible. And so being able to not take life personal is a great life skill. It's a great agreement, and it speaks directly to what you talked about with the things that make procrastination a problem in the white supremacy culture. And so, this idea that this is how life needs to be. Again, it goes back to expectations, right? It's no, you must be this way. If you don't fit inside my box, get out of my box, right?
Yeah.
And it's come on.
Well, and the thing that I like that you talked about, you mentioned the idea of making excuses, and that also connects to that sense of lack of reflection, right? If you're not reflecting, what are you doing? You're probably making excuses either for why you got the bad score or why you didn't make the attempt in the first place. And because you've now given me 2 entry points, I'm going to go ahead and take the easy bait on the red pen thing. I got really frustrated year 2 or 3 of teaching. I had, for years, my mom, part of it is because that red ink does stick with people, right? Because of all those
Yeah.
negative comments and how that holds with people. And actually a lot of random people too would just buy me red pens, right? Like they just assumed, oh, you're a teacher now, you need red pens. And
Right.
then I had another, I think, very well-intentioned, well-meaning like person talk to me about like, oh, we're not supposed to use red pens anymore because the red ink like creates this like built-in anxiety or whatever for our students. And I was like, this was even before I like really had thought through my answer very far. But my initial response is, well, that's asinine, excuse my language, but like if we all just start using green pens to write mean things in the comment section or to only write criticism of our students, guess what? Within a year or two, they will be conditioned to not like green ink. This is a silly
Right.
proposition. The
Right.
answer to the problem is not to change the ink, is to change the nature of the comments that we are giving and to change the nature of space that we are presenting for our students.
Yes. Yes.
Come on. So that was a rant that I wanted to go on. It's like it's kind of just anything related to grades, right? But it's just that idea of like, oh, let's just change the color of the ink and the comments won't be a problem anymore. No, how about you're right? Point out when they do well, but still continue to hold them accountable when this is not a good use of a direct quote.
Because the red ink is not the problem. It's the meaning attached to the red ink. I remember we're at Challenge Day and we were doing, we do this section where we do cards and we write basically like a love note, right? It doesn't have to be like an intimate romance, like it's I love you, buddy kind of thing too, right? But like we write these notes to people who are very meaningful to us. It's a beautiful, heartfelt moment, and this older gentleman was going to write his card, and his particular group, for whatever reason, the only pens that were available, weird, right, at a school, like half of the pens were red pens because those were the only pens that were available. They had pencils and red pens and like a couple of black pens, but mostly red pens. So that in itself tells a story, right, that we just kind of went on. But he was like, I refuse to write this letter in red pen. And I was like, why? Right. And he was like, because they used to apparently do like death certificates or something in red pen. This is something I didn't know. And I never checked the validity of it. Right. But he had assigned the meaning that red pens meant death. And if I wrote a letter to my spouse in a red pen, it signified that she was going to be dead. Right. And so like this meaning we attach to things is so powerful. Yeah. It's amazing. And again, if we go right back into perfectionism with meaning, one, don't take it personal. Two, everything you are doing, like if you get anxiety because if I don't get it right on the first attempt, I am a failure. One, you made it personal. Two, why is this meaning attached to it, right? Did you have a parent that like only rewarded you for success, right? And there's not the effort base. Is it because, in school, maybe you had a teacher that just ripped your paper apart unless it was 100% accurate, right? And you only got criticism, but figure out why you have the meanings to these things that are preventing you from attempting and ultimately achieving. But we got to get past that somehow. And I think one of the best ways is to understand why we have such resistance to certain things in our lives.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know.
Mucho agreement.
Mucho agree. Oh man. Well, I know you get to close us out with a story time. So I'm excited to see what you've got on some perfectionism, because I'm sure both of us could tell stories on stories on stories of some of this. So take it away. Hey, everybody, jumping in the middle of this episode real quick, just to remind you to go check out littlebiged.com. You can follow us there and join our email list, which will give you access to all of our free resources that we've been posting for the last multiple months at this point. So please jump on that. This week, what we're adding to the free resource container is the list of activities. We talked about it last week and added it last week, but just kind of re-highlighting that and adding a few more on how to initiate speed and focus on attempts versus accuracy. So jump on there, join our list, and let's get back to story time with K-Dub.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out a story because, like you said, it's there's a lot to pull from. And I decided to try and pick one that I hope will be kind of like a, a lesson for everyone else, or at least kind of an example of how to take things and put a positive spin on them. So one of the benefits that I found, so this is a very personal story. This is not about a student this time. One of the benefits that I've really found from being in this remote setting, right? Like we just went to hybrid learning last week, so we're still doing most of our teaching online in the school that I'm at. Is that to just acknowledge, like from day one, like this is not gonna be quote unquote normal. There's no way to replicate the way I do things in the classroom, or that I have done things in the classroom in an online setting. That's going to be impossible. So there's no way for this to meet my old standard of being perfect. And I think one of the reasons that I have been less stressed, less anxious, and more positive, I guess, about this whole experience is that I was willing to accept that from a really early stage and just treat this whole year as an experiment, and a lot of just, trial and error. And I did want to perfect how to be a remote distance teacher. I don't want to get that twisted, right? Like I was very focused on how can I be the best possible teacher in this setting. But the first thing that I did was accept that, like, I'm not going to be perfect at the beginning. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to own those up front with my students. I'm going to ask for a lot of feedback from my students. And the number of turns and twists that we have taken throughout the course of this process have been extensive, right? There's been a lot of them because I knew that I wasn't going to be perfect. And the thing that is probably the best reminder of that is last week we went to hybrid learning, and it was really weird because it was kind of like the third time, like I felt like we were starting school like for the first time, right? It was like I'm seeing some of my students for the first time in person. So there's kind of that first day feel, a whole new learning format, and of how am I going to work with seeing these kids for an hour and 15 minutes once a week, and then still doing all the new learning in the mornings and on remote and all that stuff. In my first 2 days, I walked away from school just being like, man, I totally bombed, right? Like that was not even close to the way that I would have wanted that to go. And I can go through the mistakes I made. Like I started off with the school-wide lesson, which was pretty rote and pretty dry. And then I went straight into some direct instruction that was kind of long-winded on a reading assignment. I went with something that I knew they might have a little bit of resistance to, and then because it was our first time together and we were wearing masks, like that level of ratchetedness up was even higher. And so I was just in this whole funk about, man, this is not working. And then this is the other thing I would encourage people: when you are in pursuit of perfection, don't go it alone. So I made sure, like, we usually have this Wednesday morning meeting with some of my social studies colleagues. We weren't going to do it, but I kind of pushed, hey, like, let's at least show up and just share how things are going. Mostly because I wanted to hear what other people were doing, because I felt like I wasn't doing a good job. And this other teacher talked about how he went straight in with this really interactive connection game, like gamifying part of his philosophy unit, which I know you're big into gamifying teaching, and this really cool thing. And then he just gave them some time at the end of class to work on whatever they needed to work on, right? And that sounded like a great plan. So we have Wednesday off. Then Thursday we're back into cohort B. Cohort B got a completely different first day with me than cohort A did, and I completely changed. And I could feel the vibe in the room was dramatically different, and I felt way better about the way things were going. So my story time today is just about, when you are starting something new, I think just acknowledge up front, hey, this is not going to be perfect, right? Like, I'm going to make mistakes. And then my kind of other challenge for those of you who are in any position like me, don't go it alone. And some of the things that I'm doing now are better than the things I was doing before, right? Like, there are things that I'm doing in remote instruction now that I never would have done if it hadn't been for remote instruction. So one of those, this activity that I do called mic check, and it's the way I essentially take attendance now, is I only do it once a week, but I come up with a question, and it's something as innocuous. Today it was, what's one thing that you love and one thing that you hate about spring, right? And you can learn a lot about your students from something like that. Plus it's just fun, right? So we talked about allergies, we talked about flowers blossoming, You get the kids who honestly admit, like, I love that it's almost summer and I hate that it's not quite summer. What came up a couple times where we're all kind of reaching that breaking point right now in the school year. But just doing that, like, that is something that I never would have done before. And I promise you that is something that we're going to do moving forward when I go back to in-person learning full time, is that we're going to do these little kind of just innocuous check-ins and connection opportunities. So the second challenge I have for people related to that is, if you're starting something new and you find something that's worked and the circumstances change, carry the new stuff with you, right? Don't just go back to normal. Like, accept that there's a new normal possible and try and push through with that is something that I would encourage everybody to do.
Love it. Yeah. I really want to highlight one of the first things you said was your mindset going into this was, I knew it wasn't going to be perfect. And if we can teach ourselves and teach our students to have that shift in mindset to get away from it has to be perfect on that first attempt, like, that's such a game changer. Like, I remember telling my cohort teacher colleagues, right, that I was like, hey, I'm going to go project-based for the last 6 weeks. No idea how this is going to play out. And I'm excited to watch it, like, probably not work on my first attempt, right? And this first project for 3 weeks has been brutal, but we've learned a ton. And I'm so stoked for that the second project coming up. But for that shift in mindset, like, such a game changer. So,
yeah. I mean, just hearing you talk, one of the things I'm realizing I had written down in my notes was, it's not just it's not just my mindset. It's also the mindset of the students. And one of the big differences between first semester and second semester, when I got a new batch of students, is I was really upfront with my students first semester. I'm not going to be perfect. You're not going to be perfect. We're all going to muddle through this and struggle through this together. Please, at any point that you have feedback, give it to me. Let's talk, whatever. And that group felt like, in many ways, they were having a better go of it. And I didn't do that check-in and that reminder about the student mindset. Like, I still had that for myself with that new batch of students, but I forgot to kind of give them that permission and that reminder for my class. And I don't think it's the only reason that it's been a little bit more of a struggle this semester. I think there's just some walls that are for motivation and things that are going up, but mindset, to your point of emphasis, is really important for everybody involved in the process.
Right. And this is great for our relationship with our students and any other relationship in our life. Just because you know the expectation doesn't mean they know it.
Yep. Communication, my friend.
Teach it early, teach it often, and it's okay to ask for what you need in any part of your life and not assume somebody is going to know what you want because they should know what you want.
You sound like a married man, Tim.
I'm learning.
Me too.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, thanks for finishing that up for us. We're so happy everybody's joining us, and we're hoping you're taking the nuggets one by one here and continuing on your growth towards whatever perfect looks like, but keep perfecting it. Never get stuck. Always try something and get started early and often. So we'll see you all back here next week. Always learning a peak state.
Make it a great day.